She wore white to her own countdown. That is the part that stays with you. Not the restaurant. Not the man. Not what he did. The fact that Seline Cash, 28 years old, 3 days left on the clock the doctors had given her, put on a white silk gown, booked a table at the best restaurant in Seoul, and decided that whatever time she had left was going to look exactly the way she wanted it to. That kind of courage does not announce itself. It just walks through a door and sits down and orders dessert. The problem was the man at the table behind her.
Park Siwon,
32. Owner of John, the restaurant she was sitting in, and approximately 4 other things that made him the kind of person who stopped noticing other people a long time ago. He was finishing his dinner alone, the way he always finished his dinner, at table 1, the best table, the one by the window. No company. No noise. Just him and his food and the quiet agreement between himself and the world that things would go the way he expected them to. He reached to his right without looking, grabbed something soft, brought it to his mouth, and wiped. Seline felt the tug before she understood what it was. She turned, and the man at the table was pulling her white gown away from his mouth with the calm expression of someone who had just found a minor inconvenience in his evening. She stared at him. He looked at the fabric, looked at her, looked at the fabric again. And then, and this is the part that truly started everything, he laughed. "I am sorry," he said in English, setting the gown down like it was a napkin he had borrowed. "I thought that was mine." Seline looked at the sauce stain now decorating the hem of the dress. She said, very carefully, "That is my gown."
Yes.
"I can see that now." "You wiped your mouth with my gown. There was sauce. I apologize." She blinked slowly.
Once.
The way a person blinks when they are deciding between a civilized response and something much more honest. "Do you know what that gown cost?" He reached into his jacket without hesitation and produced a card, matte black, slid it across to her table with 2 fingers.
"There is no limit on that."
"Buy whatever you like." Seline looked at the card. Then she slid it back. Siwon's hand went still. This did not happen to him. "I do not want your money," she said. "I want an actual apology. One that sounds like you mean it, and not like you are outsourcing the problem." He looked at her for a moment with the careful attention of a man recalibrating. "I am sorry. That was careless of me. Thank you. Was that so hard?" "No." "Good." She turned back to her dessert. The most beautiful thing she had seen in months, this dessert, and she had exactly 3 days left to enjoy beautiful things, so she picked up her spoon and went back to it. He turned back to his dinner. Except Park Siwon was not built for being dismissed. Something about this woman, the way she had looked at him, not with anger, not with awe, just with the calm expectation that he was capable of better, was sitting in his chest in a way that was difficult to locate and impossible to ignore. He turned back around. "You saved for this dinner," he said. Seline paused her spoon. "Excuse me? The way you are eating. You are someone who does not come here often, but you came tonight for a reason." She turned to face him fully. "Are you analyzing me right now?" "I am observing. I own this restaurant. I observe everything." "Fascinating. Do you offer this service to all your customers, or am I special?" He almost smiled. "Almost. I am saying you should not spend your evening being upset.
The dinner is on me."
"The dinner is not on you. I own the restaurant. I am paying for my dinner. You are being difficult. I am being a customer. They are different things." She went back to her dessert. "Enjoy your evening, Mr.
Park
Siwon." "Mr. Park. Enjoy your evening." He stood up. Because this was his restaurant, and he had offered twice and she had declined twice, and the part of him that had spent 11 years being the person others deferred to could not quite settle into the new arrangement. "I own this restaurant. I can comp your table. I can replace your dress. I can do whatever I want in this space, and I am trying to help you." He had raised his voice. It was not a shout, but it was close enough. And Seline swayed. Subtle at first. Her hand went to the table edge. Her eyes lost focus. And then she was falling, and Siwon was already moving before his brain had caught up with his body, grabbing her before she hit the floor, and she was lighter than she should have been, and her skin was too warm, and the dessert fork was still in her hand, because she had been holding it when the world went sideways. He looked at her face. Still. Lashes against her cheek. Breathing but shallow. Call an ambulance, he said. His voice came out different than he expected. Quieter.
Now.
He did not put her down. He carried her himself to the entrance, rode in the ambulance with his hand over hers, and spent the entire journey looking at a woman he did not know and feeling like he had just broken something that was not his to break. At the hospital, a nurse cut across the waiting room toward him with the energy of someone who had been awake for 12 hours and had made her peace with bluntness. Her name tag said Nurse Cash. She looked at him the way nurses look at people who are about to be held responsible for something. You brought her in? Yes. The staff at the restaurant said you were arguing with her. It was not an argument. You raised your voice. He opened his mouth, closed it. Nurse Cash looked at him for a long moment. The woman you were shouting at is seriously ill. Stress is one of the things we work very hard to protect her from. She paused, and something moved across her face, controlled and professional and barely containing something much larger underneath. I hope whatever you were arguing about was worth it. She walked away before he could respond. Seoul sat down in the hard plastic chair in the corridor and did not move for 45 minutes. When he was allowed in, Seline was awake. Barely. Eyes open. Looking at the ceiling with the patience of someone who had spent enough time in this room to have stopped being surprised by it. She looked at him. Why are you still here? Her voice was rough at the edges. I brought you in. You can go. I know.
He sat down.
She looked at her hands. Then, quietly, like she was reporting a fact rather than making a complaint, she said, You ruined it. What? My last wish. She said it plainly. No performance in it, just the flatness of something that had been looked at from every angle and accepted. I have always wanted to eat at John, the best restaurant in Seoul. I planned it. I saved for it. I wore the dress. I sat at the table. And then you wiped your mouth on my gown and raised your voice at me, and I passed out before I could finish my dessert.
A pause.
So that is that. Silence. I cannot forgive you for that, she said. Not the gown. Not the shouting. For ruining the one thing I had looked forward to. Seoul was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. Give me 2 hours. She blinked. What? 2 hours. Stay here. I am in a hospital bed. 2 hours, Seline. She went still. I did not tell you my name. Your reservation. I checked before the ambulance arrived. He paused at the door. You are not easy to forget.
And he left.
Seline stared at the ceiling. Then she said to the empty room, quietly, Absolutely not. But she was already almost smiling. If you are watching this from your bed, your couch, your office when you should absolutely not be on your phone, drop it in the comments right now. Where are you watching from? Because this story is traveling and we love knowing where it lands. And subscribe to Unscriptedkay if nobody has sent you there yet because you found this yourself and that means your taste is already doing something right. We are not even halfway through. 2 hours later the door opened and it was not a nurse. It was Seoul's head waiter, Min-jun, carrying a folded tablecloth with the focus of a man on a mission he took personally. Behind him came 2 staff members with bags and a portable speaker and, what was unmistakably, a small lamp. Seline sat up. What is this? Min-jun bowed. Mr. Park asks for 5 minutes to set up. Set up what? This is a hospital room. Yes, ma'am. We are aware. Seoul came in last, changed out of his dinner clothes, carrying a covered dish himself. The tablecloth went over the rolling table. Battery-powered candles appeared because a nurse had already vetoed the real ones. Yellow flowers because he had asked the front desk what color and the woman at reception had guessed yellow with surprising confidence. And the dessert, the same one, perfectly remade, the one Seline had been holding when she fell. Seline looked at all of it. This is the most unnecessary thing I have ever seen, she said. Probably. You rebuilt my dinner. In a hospital room. You said your last wish was to eat at the best restaurant in Seoul. I brought the best restaurant in Seoul to you. He lifted the cover. The food was still warm. Your main course. Remade. And the dessert, which you did not get to finish. She looked at the battery-powered candles. Then she laughed. Real, surprised, pulled out of her against her own will. You are completely unhinged, she said. You already suspected that. You rejected my card. That was intelligence, not instinct.
Eat.
Before it goes cold.
She ate.
And he sat with her, not eating himself, just present, and they talked in the way that people talk when the pressure of performance has been removed and only the actual conversation remains. She told him she had been in Seoul 3 years and loved it in a way that still caught her off guard. He told her his grandfather's street stall was the beginning of everything, a small tent and 3 recipes, and that his grandfather would find what it had become both impressive and slightly tragic. She said his grandfather sounded like someone who understood what things were actually for. He said his grandfather would have liked her. She asked how he could possibly know that. He said his grandfather had a category for people who did not take the easy money, and he kept it very small. She looked at him. He would have liked that I refused your card. He would have found it deeply satisfying. She laughed again. Softer this time. Later, when the room was quiet and Seline was close to sleep, she said, I forgive you. For what it is worth. It is worth a great deal. Do not make it into something. I am not. You're doing the face. What face? The face you make when you think something matters. Your chin does this thing. She was too tired to elaborate. Just accept the forgiveness. Accepted. She closed her eyes. Then, almost to herself, how did you know yellow was my favorite color? I asked. Who did you ask? The woman at reception. I described you. And she just knew? She said any woman who walks in here in a white gown in the middle of everything probably likes yellow. Something about optimism. Seline was quiet. That is either a beautiful guess or everyone here knows more about my situation than I thought. He said nothing. Just sat with her until her breathing steadied and she was asleep. Then, he found Dr. Kong. There is a treatment, he said. Tell me about it. Dr. Kong looked at him with the careful expression of a man who had learned to measure how much information a person could carry at once. Mr. Park, the experimental protocol is not guaranteed. And the cost is the kind that changes things. How much? Dr. Kong told him. Siwon did not move. What is the probability it works? 40%. 45, if we start soon. She is young and her body is stronger than the timeline suggests. What do I sign to start it tomorrow? Mr. Park, this would affect your finances considerably. I want you to understand that before you. She ate alone tonight, Siwon said quietly. She came by herself, wearing a dress her mother picked with her, to a restaurant she saved for, because she wanted one good thing before she ran out of time. I ruined it. He looked at the doctor. I want to give it back to her.
The time.
Not just the dinner. The time. He met Dr. Kang's eyes. What do I sign? Dr. Kong handed him the forms.
He signed.
He was walking back down the corridor when Nurse Cash stepped out of a room and stopped directly in front of him. She had the same professional directness as before, but something in her posture had shifted slightly, as if she had been standing near the corridor for longer than her duties required. Dr. Kong told me what you just agreed to, she said. It is not his information to share. I asked him to tell me. I told him I needed to know who is making decisions about this patient. She looked at him steadily. You understand the treatment may not work. I understand. And you understand what you are spending. I do. She studied him for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. She has no family here. No one has come through that door in 7 months except her colleague twice and a friend once. She paused. You are a stranger who wiped his mouth on her dress and raised his voice at her. And now you are signing forms that could make you broke. She looked at him directly. Why? Siwon held her gaze. Because I want to make sure she gets the time to eat the rest of that dessert. The whole thing. Properly. Nurse Cash looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression settled, not warmth exactly, but the particular change that happens when a person decides to revise their assessment of someone. She likes yellow, she said finally. Not an explanation. Just information she was offering because she had been in that room enough times to know it, and it seemed relevant. I know, he said. I found out. She nodded once and walked back down the corridor. Siwon watched her go. He did not know why Nurse Grace Cash had told him that. But he had the feeling she was the kind of person who only said things once and meant them completely. The treatment started Monday. Nobody told Seline it would be easy, and she had privately hoped they were underselling it.
They were not underselling it.
The first week was the kind of tired that lived in her bones and paid rent there, the kind where getting to the window and back felt like a negotiation with gravity. But Seline Cash had not gotten this far by losing negotiations, so she got to the window and back, and then she got into bed, and she counted it as a win. Siwon came every day. Not announced. Not lengthy. Sometimes an hour, sometimes less, but consistent in the way that only people who have made a private decision are consistent. He brought food from a pojangmaka 2 blocks away that he had found at midnight on a walk he had taken because sitting still was not something he was good at. He brought coffee on the days she could not eat. Once he came with a single yellow tulip and no explanation and left it on the windowsill and left before she could make a comment about it, which she had absolutely been preparing. She told him once on a Thursday that he did not have to keep coming. He said he was aware.
He came the next day.
She told him on a Friday that his restaurant was probably suffering without him. He said Min-jun was managing perfectly and had in fact suggested Siwon take more time away, which was either very loyal or very telling. She told him on a Saturday that she was not his responsibility. He said, "I know. That is not why I come." She said, "Then why?" He looked at her for a moment and said, "Because you are the most interesting part of my day, and I run a successful restaurant empire, so that should tell you something." She stared at him. "That is either incredibly flattering or incredibly sad." "I prefer flattering." "Of course you do." He smiled and she looked away first, and they both pretended that was nothing. It was not nothing. Nurse Cash had the habit of finding small reasons to pass by the room on the days Siwon visited. She would check charts that did not need checking. She would adjust things that were already adjusted. She never stopped or said anything unnecessary. But she passed by and she noticed, and sometimes after she passed by she would stand in the corridor for a moment with her clipboard held at her side before continuing down the hall. She had seen a lot of things in this ward. Families who showed up and families who did not. People who paid for treatments and never came back to see how they went. She had not seen many Park Siwons. She was professional enough not to say so out loud. But she noticed. The scan results came 3 weeks in. Dr. Kong called Siwon before he called anyone else because Siwon had asked him to, and because the news was the kind that deserved to land softly. 31% reduction, Dr. Kong said. 3 weeks. Her body is responding better than the model projected. She is in the 45%, and she is climbing. Siwon sat down on the bench outside the radiology department. He sat there for a full minute. Then he walked to her room. Seline was working. Laptop open, glasses on, some presentation half built on the screen because she had told her company she was on medical leave and they had respected it for 12 days before she decided that lying in bed doing nothing was actively making her feel worse. She looked up when the door opened. She read his face before he said a word. Siwon. 31% reduction. 3 weeks. She closed the laptop. Very slowly. Both hands flat on the cover. Dr. Kong says you are climbing. She pressed both hands over her mouth. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and she grabbed his arm. Not crying, Seline did not cry easily. It was a thing she had built into herself young and maintained through discipline, but she was shaking slightly and her breathing was careful, the breathing of someone holding something enormous as gently as they can. "Do not tell me you told me so," she said into her hands. "I was not going to. You were thinking it. I was thinking about the menu. The one you're going to eat in full when you walk back in." She laughed. Wet at the edges but real. "I am ordering everything. There are no prices on my menu. There he is." She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "I was wondering when the arrogant man from table 1 would come back.
He has been here the whole time.
You just make him behave better." She looked at him. Really looked, the way she had been trying not to, the way that required acknowledging what the last 3 weeks had built between them without the permission of either party. "I need to say something." "Say it." "When you first started coming every day, I told myself it was guilt. That you were managing your conscience, and once it cleared you would stop showing up."
She paused.
"You did not stop showing up."
No.
And then I told myself it was pity, that you're the kind of person who adopts broken things. And you do not look at me like something broken. She said it like she was still slightly surprised by this. You look at me like something happening. He was quiet. I am falling in love with you, she said, which is either exactly right or extremely poor timing depending on how the next few months go. It is exactly right. You cannot know that. The scan says 31% in 3 weeks. The doctor says climbing. I know enough. Seline. I've been here every day. He looked at her directly, steadily, without performance. Not for my conscience. Not for pity. Because every conversation I have with you is the best part of my day, and I run restaurants and hotels, and I have had a lot of good days. You are better than all of them. He paused. I want to find out who you are when you are not fighting. I want to be there when you make director before 30. I want to be the person who books table 1 and has to share it with you this time. She looked at him for a long time. You are so different from the man who laughed at my dress, she said. He is still in there. I know. I do not entirely hate him. That is the most romantic thing you have said to me. She laughed, and this time she did not look away from him. Just let herself look. Let the warmth of it land without moving out of the way. In the corridor outside, Nurse Cash was doing her rounds. She paused at the door, heard the laugh, stood there for a moment, then continued down the hall at a slightly less efficient pace than usual, and anyone watching her face would have seen the particular expression of someone who had decided, quietly and without announcement, that things were going to be all right. The weeks moved differently after the scan results. Time, which had been rationed and heavy, started to stretch again. 7 weeks in, Seline walked to the window and stood there for 20 minutes without needing to sit down, and she cried then, finally, because that was an occasion that had earned it. 8 weeks in, she beat Dr. Kong at cards 3 times in a row, and he accused her of cheating, and she said she would not dignify that with a response, which was as good as a confession. 9 weeks in, the numbers were good enough that Dr. Kong used the word remission in a sentence without immediately qualifying it into oblivion. Seline was in the hallway when Dr. Kong came out of her room with the latest results. He looked at the doctor's face. Dr. Kong, who had trained himself over 20 years to deliver news without the news landing on his own face first, allowed himself, just this once, to look like someone who was genuinely glad. She is going to be all right, he said. Seline put his hand against the wall. He stood there for a moment with his eyes closed, and the corridor was ordinary around him, fluorescent lights and distant footsteps and the specific smell of a place where serious things happen all the time, and he felt something in his chest release that he had not realized he had been holding for 9 weeks straight. Nurse Cash was at the station when he walked past. She was writing something. She looked up.
He stopped.
She is going to be all right, he said quietly. Nurse Cash put her pen down. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "Good." Just that one word. But she said it the way people say things when a word has to carry more than its usual weight because the situation does not allow for more. Then she picked her pen back up and went back to work, and Seline continued down the corridor, and the hospital moved around both of them the way hospitals do, indifferent and continuous and full of things happening in every direction. He went back to Celine's room. She was sitting up, hair wrapped, the yellow tulip from 3 weeks ago still on the windowsill because she had never moved it. She looked at him with the expression she had developed over 9 weeks, the one she thought was neutral, but was not neutral at all. "You heard," she said. "I heard. Dr. Kong has no sense of privacy." He looked happy. I could tell from his face. She looked at the window. "I want to go outside. Tomorrow. Just to stand outside and be a person on a pavement. I will take you. You do not have to come." "I want to, Seline." "Seline." She looked at him. "You are going to be very difficult to get rid of, aren't you?" "Essentially impossible," he agreed. She pressed her lips together against a smile.
"Fine.
Tomorrow.
Pavement.
You can come." Generous. "Do not push it." He sat down in the chair beside her bed, the chair that had taken the shape of his presence over the last 9 weeks, and she leaned her head back and looked at the ceiling, and they stayed like that for a while. The room quiet, the yellow tulip on the windowsill, Seoul outside the glass doing what Seoul always did. The next morning, Seline walked to the nurse's station in her regular clothes, the first time she had worn her own clothes in 9 weeks. Nurse Cash looked up from her computer. "Discharged today?" Nurse Cash asked. "Discharged today," Seline confirmed. Nurse Cash looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has watched a person fight something hard and seen them come out the other side. "You look well," she said. It was a clinical observation, but the way she said it was not entirely clinical. "I feel well," Seline said. Nurse Cash nodded once. Then she went back to her screen. "The paperwork will be ready in 30 minutes. Do not leave without signing the release forms." "I know the drill by now." "You do," Nurse Cash agreed. And then, without looking up from her screen, she said, "Take care of yourself, Miss Cash." Seline looked at her for a moment. The name tag, G. Cash. She had never asked what the G stood for. It occurred to her now that she had spent 9 weeks in this ward and never asked. "What does the G stand for?" she said. Nurse Cash looked up. "Grace," she said. "That is a good name," Seline said. "It suits me," Grace Cash said, and there was something in the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. She went back to her paperwork. Seline stood there for a moment, and then she said, "Thank you for everything. You were good at your job in a way that went beyond the job." Grace Cash looked up one more time. She held Celine's gaze for a moment. "You were easy to root for," she said simply. Then she looked back at her screen, and that was that. Siwan was waiting in the corridor. He had her bag. He had coffee. He looked at her when she came toward him, and she looked back at him, and something that did not need to be said passed between them the way things do when two people have been in a small hospital room together for long enough that they have run out of pretending. They walked out. Siwan walked Seline out of the hospital into Seoul air, cold and bright, and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside, the way cities are. She stopped on the pavement and just stood there for a moment, face up, eyes closed, breathing. He stood beside her and said nothing. After a while she said, "I have been thinking about something."
"What?"
"You once told me that your grandfather would have liked me because I rejected your card. And I said, how could you possibly know that?" She opened her eyes. "I know now." "What do you know?" "That you are exactly like him. You build things because you love them, not because of what they give you back." She looked at him. "Your grandfather built a stall because he loved feeding people. You built everything else for the same reason. You just had more money to do it with." She paused. "And when you sat with me in that hospital room and brought the food and the battery-powered candles, that was not guilt. That was just you. That is just what you do with the things you love." He looked at her. "You love me," she said. "You said it first to my doctor's face before you said it to mine, and that is honestly very funny, but it also means you meant it before you even knew if I would live long enough to hear it." He held her gaze. "Yes. Say it properly. I love you, properly and on the record, and in full awareness that you are going to be extremely difficult about it." She smiled. "I love you too. And I want the record to show that I resisted this for as long as any reasonable person could be expected to. The record shows it." "Good." She took his hand again, and they stood there on the pavement in the cold Seoul morning, alive and deliberate, and in possession of something neither of them had planned for. 3 weeks later, Seline Cash walked into John. Green dress. Her own choosing. Min-jun held the door. He bowed with the extra degree of formality reserved for occasions he wanted to mark. Seline came to table 1, the best table, the window table, and sat down. Siwan came out of the kitchen. She looked at him across the room. This man who had wiped his mouth on her gown and laughed, and then spent everything he had, and sat in a plastic hospital chair for 9 weeks, and told her he loved her on a pavement in the cold, and she said, loud enough for the nearest tables, "I would like to see the full menu, please. Every single page. And I want to know if the napkins are properly placed, because I have history with this restaurant, and I refuse to be caught off guard." The table beside her laughed. Min-jun covered his smile. Siwan walked to her table and stood across from her. "The napkins are correctly placed. I checked personally.
Twice.
3 times. Good." She picked up the menu, then set it down, then looked at him directly. "Sit down, Siwan." He sat. I looked up what you spent on my treatment, she said. I told you not to. I know. I did it anyway. She looked at him. It was almost everything. I still have the restaurant. You mortgaged 2 hotels. They are performing very well now. That is not the point.
She paused.
You spent that on a woman you met on a Thursday, in your own restaurant, who rejected your card.
Twice.
Twice, she agreed. And you still did it. He looked at her steadily. My grandfather used to say that some people walk into a room and you can feel that they are supposed to be there, that the room makes more sense with them in it. He paused. You walked into my restaurant, and I was rude to you, and you still made it make more sense. I was not going to let that go. She looked at him for a long time. You are going to be impossible to argue with, she said. You will manage. I really will. She picked up the menu again. I am ordering the most expensive thing. There are no prices. Then I am ordering everything. There is no everything on the menu. Then I will come back every day until I have tried everything. He leaned slightly forward. I was hoping you would say something like that. She looked at him over the top of the menu. This is not a date, by the way. No. This is a meal. The date is next week. I am choosing the location. I look forward to being taken somewhere by a woman who saved for 4 months to eat at my restaurant. That is incredibly rude. You started it. She put the menu down and laughed, and it filled the space the way her laugh always did, completely and without apology, and Siwon sat across from her at table 1 and thought about his grandfather standing behind a small tent at 2 in the morning with 3 recipes and no plan, building something he loved from nothing, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like everything he had built had finally figured out what it was for. Min Jun appeared with a quiet formality. Shall I begin with a tasting menu? Seline looked at Siwon. Siwon looked at Seline. Yes, she said. We have time. And she meant it the way you mean something when time has stopped being a countdown and started being a gift. The way you mean it when you have been on the other side of not having enough of it and have come back changed. Some things are worth fighting for. Some people are worth spending everything on. Some moments are worth being fully in without holding part of yourself back for the version of events that goes wrong. Seline Cash had worn white to her last wish and walked into her destiny instead. Pay attention to what walks into your life disguised as an inconvenience. Pay attention to people who expect better from you and wait to see if you can deliver it. Pay attention to the ordinary Thursday evenings that are actually the beginning of everything. And if this story found you, keep it. Share it with someone who needs to believe that the best things can start from the most chaotic places. Subscribe to Unscriptedkay, because we have more of these, and they only get better from here.